So, interesting story. I was on Twitter a couple weeks ago, and I learned that racism has returned. I know, I thought it kind of took a break, but this guy was telling me that racism is popular again. I mean, I guess in the 60s it kind of hung out for like 50 years, and then on election night, it's looking kind of bad. Around 12 p.m., 4 p.m. was looking a little bit better, and then by midnight, racism was here. It was alive. Racism was here, right? It was born. It was born on election night, right? No. Racism never left. It's always been here. 5 days ago, 5 years ago, over 50 years ago. It's never left. And yet it feels like racism seems worse. Why is that? What's going on? Why is it that whenever I go on Twitter or Facebook, I'm always reading articles about an elementary school or a train being vandalized with swastikas? Or I hear about a white supremacist who murders someone because they're black or because they're brown. Happened over here in New York. What's going on? Why does it seem like we're just more racist? Is there a thing going on? Is there a person who's responsible? What is going on? Who do we point the finger to? It's me. It's actually me. I am the reason why it seems like we're more racist. It's my fault, but it's also their fault. And it's also a lot of your fault. And if the world seems more racist, then that means that I'm actually doing my job. As a social activist, our responsibility is to educate you and teach you about racism. So you know that it is everywhere. So you know that it exists in these microaggressions at work or at school. So you know that it is systemic, it is everywhere, it is constant. But what's the deal? Why does it still seem like racism is worse? What's going on? Well, a lot of it is because we compare our knowledge of racism to what happened in the 1960s civil rights movement. And that is sort of our gauge of what racism looks like. But what if we're wrong about that? What if we have a distorted perception of racism in the 60s? Let me explain. So, there is a scene. It's a photo, a very famous photo. Happened in Birmingham, Alabama. And you see this gentleman being attacked by police dogs and grabbed by an officer. Now, if you were an activist and if you wanted people to understand that this happened, that this existed, first, you'd have to be present. You'd have to watch the whole thing. Take in all of the information. Who was involved? What were their names? What street were you on? What time? What did they say before? Gathering all that, you rush over to the nearest payphone, or an office phone, or a residence, and you make a call to a civil rights organization. But if you were black, and you got directed to a switchboard operator, if they knew that you were black, if they knew you were trying to contact a civil rights organization, they could hang up. Your call wouldn't go through. So that didn't work. So you had to find a different option. So they'd go through what was called a WATS line, a wide area telephone service line. And it would allow them to circumvent the switchboard operator so they can make long distance calls directly to the organization. Boom, you're patched in, right? Now, when you're on the call, you have to relay all that information fresh, right after you've seen it. And the person on the other line is writing as fast as they could about everything that is going on. And they can be taking dozens of calls, all right? Now, after, they'll take that story, that WATS report, and they'll send it out to different publications, different newspapers, to see if they'd be interested in talking about this. Well, Unfortunately, even if they were to go ahead and get that report out, they didn't always publish it. Luckily, this photo over here, you know it because it was actually published in the New York Times. But if it wasn't published in the New York Times, you probably wouldn't have heard about it. It was published in the Birmingham News. It's a couple minutes away, but it wasn't even on the front cover. It was in page 4 or page 6. And even if journalists got to these stories, a lot of them who were white didn't understand racism. So when they were talking about it, they didn't add those contexts of why it was racist, what happened. So it was already diluted. So what we already know about racism in the civil rights movement is just a fragment of what actually happened. Imagine the thousands of instances, just like that didn't go through, that weren't published. And if it wasn't published, oh well, no one knew. Contrast that to today. A lot of you are witnessing unfiltered racism. The process is so much more simple. We don't have to worry about racist switchboard operators or publications not telling everybody about what's going on in their neighborhood. All you have to do is grab out your phone, send out a text, record a video, take a photo, or you can go ahead and stream it. Facebook Live or Periscope, and everyone knows what is going on. If you're having an altercation with a police officer or someone at a department store, they know it the minute that it happens. And if word doesn't get out, then you can contact me, or you can contact any of the other civil rights organizations and civil rights pages. And we specialize in talking about race and all of these social issues. I'm sure you're familiar with them. You've heard of Sean King, DeRay McKesson, Kat Black, Francesca Ramsey, and we're all part of this network of social activists. So when that person sends out that video, we all receive it, we all talk about it, we dissect it, everyone chimes in. Who do you know? Do you know the person in the video? Do you know their parents? Can you contact them? Do you know any lawyers? Do you know any politicians? Can we get in contact with the news? What is going on? So the community as itself, they are all contributing to filling in those holes. So now you are seeing a much more complete image of what racism is. Racism seems like it's worse, but it's not. It's just more visible. Because within the activist community, we're talking about it. These conversations are out in the open. The problem with the civil rights movement of the 1960s is that they were severely hindered by the communication and technology at the time. They had to go through these different channels that would discriminate against them, so their stories wouldn't be heard. If you weren't a MLK or a Malcolm X, chances are no one would really care. But now that activism is more accessible, it is also incredibly inclusive. So we're hearing from different groups beyond just the black and the white dynamic who are talking about race. So now we're understanding, okay, so there are indigenous communities that are experiencing racism on the reservation. We're hearing and we're seeing streams of them, protests at Standing Rock. We know that this is going on with them and Asian communities and Latino communities. Extend beyond that, and you're talking about racism that intersects with LGBTQ communities. We can see and we can hear stories and their experiences about how transphobia intersects with racism. Again, broadening our scope of what racism actually is, what it means. Take it a step further. You're talking about the different levels, the different layers of racism. Now you're also talking about disability rights and how that has an intersection with racism. And when activism is conclusive, all these different groups can come in and share their experiences. You're also including undocumented citizens, or those who are Muslim, or those who are afraid to be out in public. They now have a safe space online to talk about it. Everyone is chipping in, everyone is filling in these holes, these little puzzle pieces, so that we know that racism is everywhere. And when your activism is accessible, when activism is inclusive, it is also incredibly effective. Think about it. How many of you know about the phrase people of color? How many of you know what whitewashing is? How many of you know what white supremacy is? Did you know a couple years ago? Probably not. You know because we are having these conversations and because they are real. Some of the other things that the activist community have done in the past 2 to 4 years, just recently, Donald Trump passed an executive action to ban Muslims from 7 different countries. What happened? As an activist community, we connected, we organized. We went to the nearest airport and we decided that ain't gonna happen. We protested, we got loud. Lawyers, translators, they all donated their services. And the ACLU eventually came in and said, you know what? We got this. Took them to court, and they won the first time. Another instance of our progress happened last year. A female black activist trended the tag Oscars so white because, surprise, all the nominees were unanimously white. And this was a problem with the representation, the issue of who is selecting these nominees and why there weren't more diverse members. Again, the activist community stepped in, they boycotted, they got loud, and within days, the Academy came out with an initiative that they were going to go ahead and make the selection process more diverse. And just a couple of weeks ago, if you watch the Oscars, you'd know that there were 18 black nominees, more than we've ever seen. That's progress. And this goes beyond just these 2 examples. You can see them everywhere. We have eradicated the use of Confederate flags in public spaces. No more. We've initiated police reform and encouraged them, so police have to wear body cameras. We've helped to get racist people fired who can impact their clients or their associates. So no more racist chiropractors or lawyers or owners of NBA teams. No more. Again, it's everywhere. This progress is everywhere. And because this information is so accessible, there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be on board. There is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't understand that racism exists, and you shouldn't be surprised. You shouldn't think that it just became popular. It's accessible. Everyone can join in. And if you do join in, I would definitely urge you, first thing is to understand that even though activism today versus the 1960s is very different, there has always been one constant. And it is a simple fact that leadership then and today is black. And until we can understand and appreciate the contributions of the black community to civil rights, we won't have progress. And we need to understand that we need to appreciate their efforts, and we need to respect that their lives do in fact matter. Thank you.